The conference room on the 47th floor of Chongqing Tower smelled like leather and old money. Sung Min-woo sat at the head of the glass table, his Brioni suit worth more than most people's cars, watching his executive team file in for the quarterly security briefing. He didn't look up from his tablet, he never did. Eye contact implied equality, and in this room, there was no such thing. His head of security, Director Kong, cleared his throat. "Sir, we have a new intern joining the Corporate Protection Division today. I don't care." Min-woo's voice was ice-wrapped in silk. "Interns don't concern me." The door opened. She walked in wearing clothes that looked like they'd been donated 3 owners ago, oversized blazer with frayed cuffs, slacks that bunched at the ankles, shoes so worn the leather had cracked into a roadmap of poverty. Her natural hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, no expensive products, no designer anything. Min-woo's eyes flicked up for half a second, then returned to his screen. Dismissal without words. "This is Tanisha Floyd," Director Kong continued, his voice careful. "She'll be shadowing our operations for the next 6 months as part of the government liaison program." Min-woo didn't respond. The silence stretched, thick and deliberate, until Tanisha was supposed to feel small enough to disappear. She didn't. Instead, she pulled out a chair, not at the far end where interns belonged, but 3 seats from Min-woo, and sat down with the kind of calm that comes from facing worse things than a rude billionaire. Min-woo's jaw tightened. "Interns sit in the back." "I'm not really an intern," Tanisha said, her voice steady, American accented but clear. "I'm an embedded federal consultant." But intern sounded less threatening in the email, so I let it slide. The room went silent. No one contradicted Sung Min-woo. No one sat near him without permission. And no one, absolutely no one, spoke to him like an equal. He finally looked up, really looked at her, taking in the cheap clothes, the lack of jewelry, the audacity of her posture. His lip curled slightly. "Federal consultant." He let the words drip with mockery. "And they sent you dressed like that? What did you consult on, thrift store inventory?" A few executives stifled nervous laughs. Tanisha didn't flinch. She reached into her worn messenger bag, probably bought at a flea market, and pulled out a laminated ID card. She slid it across the table with 2 fingers. It stopped directly in front of Min-woo. He glanced down, and his entire world tilted. The ID was government-issued, holographic seal glinting under the recessed lighting. Her photo, official, severe. And beneath it, in bold letters: Tactical Sniper, Level 5 License. Federal Counterterrorism Division. Authorized Lethal Force, International Jurisdiction. Min-woo's hand froze halfway to his coffee cup. Level 5. There were only 11 Level 5 snipers in the entire country. He knew because his organization had tried to bribe 3 of them. He looked up slowly, and Tanisha was watching him with the kind of patience a predator has when the prey finally realizes it's been caught. "The clothes?" she said quietly, leaning back in her chair. "Operational disguise. People underestimate what they can't afford to respect." Her eyes held his without blinking. "You just proved why it works." Min-woo's pulse hammered in his ears, but his face remained a mask. Around the table, his executives had gone pale. Director Kong looked like he'd swallowed glass. Because everyone in this room knew what Min-woo's empire really was. Chongqing Corporation was legitimate on paper, but beneath the quarterly earnings and shareholder meetings ran rivers of black market arms deals, political extortion, and violence outsourced to men who didn't exist on any official record. And the Korean government had just sent a federally licensed sniper to sit 3 feet away from him. Tanisha picked up her ID, slipped it back into her bag, and smiled, small, professional, absolutely terrifying. "So," she said. "Shall we begin the security briefing, Mr. Sung?" Subscribe to see how this unfolds and comment where you're watching from. I'd love to say hello to you just to know how far our story is going. The silence in the conference room after Tanisha revealed her credentials lasted exactly 7 seconds. Sung Min-woo counted them, the way he counted everything: breaths during negotiations, seconds before pulling a trigger, heartbeats before making decisions that ended lives. 7 seconds of his executive team holding their breath, waiting to see how their boss would handle being outmaneuvered by a woman in thrift store clothes. Min-woo picked up his coffee cup with steady hands, took a deliberate sip, and set it down with a soft click against the glass table. When he spoke, his voice carried none of the shock ricocheting through his chest. "Director Kong, proceed with the briefing." It was a masterclass in recovery. Acknowledge nothing. Show nothing. Let them wonder if he'd known all along, if this was somehow part of a larger plan, if Sung Min-woo ever truly lost control of any situation. But Tanisha saw through it. He could tell by the slight curve at the corner of her mouth, not quite a smile, more like recognition. She'd played this game before, watched powerful men pretend they weren't rattled. The briefing continued for another 40 minutes. Quarterly security assessments, personnel rotations, updated threat analyses for Chongqing Corporation's international operations. Min-woo absorbed none of it. His mind was already 3 moves ahead, calculating how to neutralize this new variable in his carefully constructed world. A federal sniper. In his building. With jurisdiction he couldn't buy or threaten his way around. When the meeting finally ended, his executives filed out quickly, grateful to escape the tension. Director Kong lingered near the door, his expression carefully neutral, but Min-woo could read the question in his oldest friend's eyes. "What do we do about her?" Min-woo gave the slightest shake of his head. "Not yet. I'll handle it." Kong nodded and left. Now it was just the two of them. Tanisha was gathering her things: a worn notebook, a pen that looked like it had been through a war, that ridiculous messenger bag. Moving with the unhurried efficiency of someone who knew exactly how dangerous this moment was and didn't care. "Miss Floyd." Min-woo's voice cut through the silence like a blade. She looked up, meeting his eyes without the deference everyone else showed. "Mr. Sung. Since you'll be observing our operations for the next 6 months, I'd like to ensure you have a comprehensive understanding of how Chongqing Corporation functions." He stood, buttoning his suit jacket with precise movements. "I'm assigning you to shadow our administrative operations this week. Filing, data entry, basic clerical work. It's important that federal consultants understand every level of our business." It was a power play, crude but effective. Reduce her to a secretary, bury her in mundane tasks, make her so bored and frustrated that she'd either quit or miss whatever she was actually here to find. Tanisha's expression didn't change. "Of course. Where should I start?" "MS. Park and Archives will show you to your workspace. 3rd sublevel, East Wing. The worst office in the building, no windows, poor ventilation, where they stuck interns who needed to be forgotten." "Sounds perfect." Tanisha slung her bag over her shoulder and headed for the door. Min-woo watched her go, waiting for some sign of anger or humiliation. There was none. She walked like someone who'd been through worse than a billionaire's petty revenge, and that bothered him more than it should have. The door closed with a soft click, and Min-woo was alone with the faint scent of her presence, something clean and utterly without pretension, like soap and gunpowder. He pulled out his phone and texted Kong, "Full background check. I want to know everything about Tanisha Floyd, where she trained, who she's worked for, why she's really here. And I want it by tonight." The response came within seconds, already on it. Min-woo stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Seoul's glittering skyline, the city he'd conquered through violence and strategy, and felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Uncertainty. By 3 p.m., Min-woo had forgotten about Tanisha Floyd. He was deep in negotiations with a Japanese arms dealer who wanted to move shipments through Busan without paying the appropriate fees to Chongqing's logistics network. The conversation required Min-woo's full attention. The kind where one wrong word meant bodies in the harbor and a territorial war he didn't have time for. When his office phone rang with an internal extension, he answered without looking at the caller ID. "I said no interruptions." Mr. Sung, this is Ms. Park from Archives. The woman's voice trembled slightly. I'm sorry to disturb you, but there's a situation with the new consultant. Minwoo's jaw tightened. Of course there was. What kind of situation? She's finished. Finished what? Everything. Ms. Park sounded bewildered. The filing backlog we've had for 3 months, she completed it in 4 hours. Then she reorganized the entire archive system, updated the digital database, and created a new indexing protocol it's actually brilliant. She also found 14 discrepancies in our shipping manifests that accounting missed. Minwoo ended the call with the Japanese dealer and stood. I'll be right down. He took the elevator to sublevel 3, his mind racing. 4 hours. 3 months of backlogged work, completed in 4 hours. Either Ms. Park was exaggerating, or Tanisha Floyd was making a point. The archives occupied the entire east wing of the sublevel, a maze of filing cabinets, storage boxes, and the accumulated paper trail of a corporation that moved billions through legal and illegal channels. The air smelled like old documents and recycled ventilation. Minwoo found Tanisha at a desk in the corner, surrounded by neatly organized stacks of folders. She was typing something on an ancient desktop computer, her fingers moving with the same precision she'd probably used to assemble a rifle. Ms. Park, a middle-aged woman who'd worked for Chongqing for 20 years, hovered nearby like she'd just witnessed a miracle. Show me, Minwoo said. For the next 10 minutes, Ms. Park walked him through what Tanisha had accomplished. The filing system was indeed reorganized with a logic that made their previous method look deliberately obtuse. The database updates were comprehensive. And those 14 shipping discrepancies? Minwoo recognized them immediately. They were phantom shipments, containers that existed on paper but not in reality, used to move weapons and contraband without creating trackable records. Tanisha had just identified the exact mechanism his organization used to hide illegal operations. And she'd done it in 4 hours while pretending to file paperwork. Thank you, Ms. Park, Minwoo said, his voice controlled. Please give us the room. The older woman left quickly, sensing the shift in temperature. Minwoo walked slowly to Tanisha's desk, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. She kept typing, not acknowledging his presence, until she hit a final key with theatrical emphasis and looked up. Was there something else she needed filed? She asked pleasantly. You found the discrepancies on purpose. I found them because they were there. She leaned back in the creaking office chair. 14 shipping containers that appear on manifests but never clear customs. Either your logistics team is catastrophically incompetent, or you're moving things you don't want governments to know about. She paused. I'm guessing it's not incompetence. Minwoo's face remained perfectly still, but inside, alarms were screaming. This woman was dangerous. Not because she was a trained killer, but because she was smart enough to see patterns everyone else missed and bold enough to say them out loud. And what do you plan to do with this information? He asked quietly. Nothing. Tanisha stood, gathering her bag. I'm not here to investigate your shipping practices, Mr. Sung. I told you what I'm here for, Federal Liaison, Corporate Security Assessment. If I wanted to bring down your operation, I wouldn't need to sort through dusty files to do it. She walked past him toward the elevator, then stopped and turned back. Oh, I also noticed something else while I was down here. What's that? Your security team has 17 blind spots in this building. 17 places where someone could enter, plant surveillance equipment, or set up a kill zone without being detected by cameras or guards. Her voice was conversational, like she was discussing the weather. Sublevel parking garage, east stairwell. No camera coverage for 40 seconds between floors. The executive elevator has a 3-second delay on the emergency protocols. The ventilation system on floor 32 can be accessed from the outside without triggering alarms. Want me to keep going? Minwoo felt ice water in his veins. He paid a fortune for the security system in this building. Had personally overseen every camera placement, every guard rotation, every failsafe. You mapped my entire operation. I'm a tactical specialist, Mr. Sung. It's what I do. She smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing he'd seen all day. I see vulnerabilities the way you see opportunities. The difference is, I'm trying to help you fix them before someone else exploits them. Why would you help me? Because despite what you think about my clothes or my background or my government job, we're not that different. She moved closer, and Minwoo forced himself not to step back. You built an empire by seeing what others couldn't. So did I. The only difference is whose laws we follow. The elevator chimed. Tanisha stepped inside and turned to face him. I'll have a full security assessment on your desk by tomorrow morning, she said. All 17 vulnerabilities, plus recommendations for fixes. No charge, consider it professional courtesy between people who understand how the real world works. The doors began to close. Miss Floyd, Minwoo called out. The doors paused, sensor detecting motion. Why are you really here? For the first time, her smile faded into something more serious. Because someone is using your organization to move weapons to people who will kill thousands. And whether you know it or not, you're going to take the fall for it unless I find them first. The elevator doors closed, and she was gone. Minwoo stood alone in the archives, surrounded by evidence of his empire, and realized with absolute clarity that Tanisha Floyd hadn't come here to observe. She'd come to hunt. And he couldn't decide if he was the prey or the bait. That evening, Kong delivered the background check on Tanisha Floyd. Minwoo read it in his penthouse office, a glass of whiskey untouched on the desk beside him. Military brat. Father was a Marine Corps colonel, mother worked intelligence. Grew up on bases in Germany, Japan, South Korea, and Virginia. Spoke 6 languages fluently by age 16. Joined the army at 18, made sniper school at 20, graduated top of her class. Her service record was partially redacted, black ops stuff that would never see public disclosure. What wasn't redacted was impressive and terrifying. Confirmed kills in 3 countries. Medals for valor that came with no details about what she'd actually done to earn them. After leaving the military, she'd gone private sector briefly, contracts with defense firms that technically didn't exist on any public registry. Then federal service, recruited into a counterterrorism division that operated in the gray space between legal and necessary. The photo clipped to the file showed a younger Tanisha in dress uniform, her expression serious, eyes hard in a way that came from seeing things that couldn't be unseen. She'd told the truth. She wasn't here to investigate him. She was here because someone in his organization was playing a game that would end with federal raids, international incidents, and Minwoo in a cell where his money and connections couldn't reach. And the only person who could save him was a woman he'd tried to humiliate with filing work. Minwoo picked up his phone and called Director Kong. Move her to the executive floor, he said. Give her full access to security operations, personnel files, everything. And Kong? Tell the team to cooperate. Anyone who gives her trouble answers to me. There was a pause on the other end. Sir, are you sure? If she's federal. She's either going to destroy us or save us, Minwoo interrupted. Either way, I'd rather have her where I can see her. He ended the call and looked out at the Seoul skyline, the city glittering like scattered diamonds against black velvet. Somewhere out there, Tanisha Floyd was probably in a modest apartment, wearing those same terrible clothes, planning her next move with the same precision she'd used to line up a kill shot. And despite everything, the danger, the uncertainty, the fact that she'd walked into his world and flipped it upside down in less than a day, Minwoo found himself smiling. Finally, after years of playing chess with fools, someone interesting had joined the game. Sung Minwoo didn't believe in federal credentials. He'd seen too many government agents flash impressive badges only to crumble under real pressure. Paperwork meant nothing in his world, only capability mattered. And despite Tanisha Floyd's service record, Despite the cold efficiency with which she'd dismantled his filing system and his security infrastructure in a single afternoon, Minwoo needed proof. Not for his organization. For himself. Because somewhere between reading her background check and watching the sun rise over Seoul, he'd realized something uncomfortable. He wanted her to be real. Wanted her to be as dangerous and competent as she claimed. The alternative, that she was just another federal bureaucrat playing dress-up in tactical gear, would be disappointing in a way he couldn't quite explain. So at 6 a.m. on her third day at Chongqing Corporation, Minwoo sent a message to her temporary office on the executive floor. Training exercise. 0800 hours. Sublevel 5, West Wing. Dress for fieldwork. He didn't expect a response, and he didn't get one. What he got instead, at exactly 7:55 a.m., was Tanisha Floyd walking into the private elevator that led to his underground shooting range, wearing the same worn tactical pants and faded black jacket she'd probably owned for a decade. Her hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and she carried nothing except a small bag that looked like it had seen multiple deployments. Minwoo was already there, standing in the observation room above the range with Director Kong and 3 of his best security operatives. Through the reinforced glass, the facility spread out below them, a state-of-the-art tactical training center that rivaled anything the Korean military possessed. "She's here," Kong said quietly, watching the monitor that showed Tanisha entering the range floor. Minwoo nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He'd barely slept, his mind replaying her words from yesterday, 17 blind spots. "I see vulnerabilities the way you see opportunities." This morning, he'd find out if she could see targets the same way. "Bring in the team," Minwoo ordered. Kong spoke into his radio, and moments later, 6 men entered the range, Minwoo's personal security detail, each one a former Special Forces operative with more confirmed kills than years of formal education. They protected him through assassination attempts, rival syndicate wars, and federal raids. They were the best money could buy. And Minwoo was about to watch Tanisha Floyd destroy them. Or prove herself a fraud. He wasn't sure which outcome he was hoping for anymore. The range master's voice crackled through the intercom system, laying out the scenario with clinical precision. Live-fire tactical exercise. Urban environment simulation. Multiple hostile targets at varying distances, 50 meters to 1200 meters. Low light conditions. Each shooter has 60 seconds to acquire and neutralize maximum targets. Scoring based on accuracy, speed, and tactical decision-making. Tanisha stood at the firing line, examining the rifle she'd been provided. A standard-issue K2C1, the Korean military's precision weapon. She checked the chamber, tested the weight, adjusted the scope with movements so automatic they looked like breathing. Beside her, Minwoo's security team went through similar preparations, but with an edge of performance to it. They were used to impressing their boss, used to being the apex predators in any tactical situation. The range master continued, "Shooters will proceed in order. Team leader Park, you're first." Park Ji-hoon was Minwoo's head of personal security, 40 years old, former 707th Special Mission Battalion, built like a wall with eyes like a shark. He'd killed 17 men in Minwoo's service, and those were just the ones officially recorded. He stepped to the firing line as the lights dropped to twilight simulation, the range transforming into an urban nightmare of shadows and indirect illumination. The buzzer sounded. Park moved like machinery, smooth and efficient. Targets popped up at various distances, cardboard silhouettes in windows, behind barriers, on rooftops. He took them methodically, 50 meters, center mass. 100 meters, headshot. 300 meters, moving target, compensating for lateral movement. Impressive. Clinical. Exactly what Minwoo paid him for. When the 60 seconds ended, Park had eliminated 11 targets. No misses. The observation room monitor displayed his accuracy rating, 97.3%. In the observation room, Minwoo watched without expression, but he felt the familiar satisfaction of owning excellence. This was his team. his investment. His edge. The other 5 security operatives went next, each performing with the brutal competence that came from $1,000,000 training budgets and real-world experience. Scores ranged from 9 to 13 targets, accuracy never dropping below 94%. Then it was Tanisha's turn. She approached the firing line with her worn bag, unzipped it, and pulled out what looked like a maintenance kit, compact, organized, nothing expensive. She made 3 minor adjustments to the rifle's scope, tested the trigger pull twice, and settled into position. No showmanship. No performance. Just preparation. "Ready?" the range master asked. "Ready," Tanisha confirmed, her voice steady through the intercom. The lights dropped. The buzzer sounded. And Tanisha Floyd went to work. The first 3 targets dropped so fast Minwoo almost missed it, 50 meters, 3 shots in 1.2 seconds, each one center mass with groupings tight enough to overlap. She transitioned to 100 meters without pause, taking moving targets with the kind of predictive shooting that required understanding physics and human psychology in equal measure. But it was at 300 meters that Minwoo leaned forward, his pulse quickening. A target appeared behind simulated cover. Just a sliver of cardboard visible, maybe 6 inches of hostile showing through a window frame. Park had ignored it earlier, correctly assessing it as too difficult for the time constraint. Tanisha put a round through it without hesitation. Dead center of the visible area. "Jesus," Kong muttered beside Minwoo. She kept moving. 500 meters, compensating for the range's slight air current that the ventilation system created. 700 meters, targets that required elevation adjustment and timing. She made it look effortless, like the rifle was an extension of her nervous system. Then the 1200-meter targets activated. These were the psychological killers, distances where most shooters couldn't even see the target clearly, let alone hit it in low light with a weapon they'd never fired before. The range had them purely for demonstration purposes, to show clients what the facility was capable of. Minwoo's team had ignored them entirely. Waste of time and ammunition. Tanisha adjusted her scope, her breathing slowing to something almost meditative. Through the observation room's high-definition cameras, Minwoo watched her face, completely calm, eyes narrowed in concentration that held no stress, only focus. She fired. 1 second passed. 2. 3. At 1200 meters, there's a delay between firing and impact. The bullet's flight time visible in slow motion if you know what to look for. The distant target dropped. Direct hit. She fired again. Another target down. The 60-second buzzer sounded. Tanisha saved her weapon, set it down with care, and stepped back from the firing line. The range master's voice came through the intercom, and for the first time since Minwoo had known him, the man sounded shaken. Final count, 23 targets eliminated. Accuracy rating, 100%. Distance record. 1200 meters, multiple confirmed hits in low-light conditions. In the observation room, Minwoo's security team had gone silent. Tanisha's voice crackled through the intercom, directed at the observation window even though she couldn't see through the one-way glass. "Mr. Sung, are you watching?" Minwoo found his voice. "I'm watching." "Good. Because I need to talk to you about your team's positioning." 10 minutes later, they were all gathered on the range floor. Minwoo's security detail standing in a loose formation, professional pride clearly wounded, while Tanisha stood before them like a professor addressing students who'd failed an exam. Minwoo leaned against the observation room support column, arms crossed, curious despite himself. Tanisha pointed to the urban simulation setup. "Team Leader Park, where did you position yourself for the 300-meter shots?" Park's jaw tightened, but he answered professionally. "Behind the concrete barrier, center position. Standard cover protocol. Standard cover that would get you killed in a real engagement." Tanisha walked to the position, demonstrating. "You're backlit by the range lights, silhouetted against a clear background. Any competent counter-sniper would have you zeroed in 4 seconds. She moved 3 feet to the left. This position, same cover, different angle. You're in shadow, no silhouette, and you have a better sight line to secondary targets. She wasn't being cruel. She was teaching, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd learned these lessons in places where mistakes meant body bags. 500-meter positioning, she continued, addressing another operative. You went prone on the elevated platform. Textbook, and suicidal. Elevated positions are kill boxes in urban combat. Every hostile is trained to check high ground first. She indicated a lower position with better concealment. Here. Same effective range, half the exposure. For 20 minutes, she walked Minwoo's elite security team through every tactical error they'd made, every positioning choice that would have resulted in casualties, every assumption that worked in a controlled range but would fail in real combat. And she did it without condescension, without ego. Just cold facts delivered with the certainty of experience. Minwoo watched Park's face transition from wounded pride to grudging respect to something like awe. The other operatives were taking notes, asking questions, engaging with Tanisha like she was the expert they'd been waiting for without knowing it. Finally, she turned toward the observation window. Mr. Sung, you have excellent marksmen. But you don't have a tactical team. They're trained for controlled scenarios, protecting you at close range, responding to immediate threats. But if you're ever targeted by someone with actual military training, someone who plans instead of reacts, your people won't be enough. The range went quiet. What would be enough? Minwoo asked, his voice carrying across the space. Tanisha's expression shifted into something that might have been a smile. Someone like me. Except I'm busy keeping you from getting arrested, so you'll have to settle for me training them instead. She picked up her worn bag, nodded respectfully to Park and his team, and headed for the elevator. Minwoo found himself following before he'd consciously decided to move. He caught her at the elevator doors. That was impressive. That was my job. She pressed the call button. This was the test, right? See if the federal consultant is actually qualified, or if I'm just paperwork and attitude. Minwoo didn't deny it. And now you know I'm not a fraud. The elevator arrived, doors sliding open. Question is, Mr. Sung, what are you going to do with that information? She stepped inside. Train my team, Minwoo said. Really train them. Whatever you think they need. That's going to take time. And trust. Tanisha held the elevator door with one hand. Are you capable of either? It was a fair question. Trust wasn't something Sung Minwoo did. Time wasn't something he gave freely. But standing there, watching this woman who'd just outperformed his entire security apparatus while wearing decade-old tactical gear, he found himself nodding. We'll find out. The elevator doors closed, and Minwoo was left alone in the hallway, his reflection staring back at him from the polished metal doors. Upstairs, Director Kong was probably waiting for orders. His executive team would be demanding explanations for why a federal consultant was being given training authority over their security operations. But Minwoo didn't move. He stood there, replaying the image of Tanisha at the firing line, calm, precise, devastating, and realized with uncomfortable clarity that he wasn't just impressed. He was fascinated. That night, Minwoo sat alone in his penthouse office, the city lights of Seoul spread beneath him like scattered diamonds. His computer screen glowed in the darkness, playing and replaying the range footage from that morning. He'd watched it 6 times already. He couldn't stop. There, the moment at the 1200-meter mark, when Tanisha had settled into position. The camera caught her face in profile, that absolute concentration, the tiny smile that curved her lips just before she fired. Not arrogance. Not performance. Just the quiet satisfaction of someone doing what they were born to do. Minwoo rewound it. Watched again. The smile. The shot. The distant target dropping. He'd built his empire on reading people, on understanding what they wanted and using that knowledge as leverage. But Tanisha Floyd didn't want anything from him, not his money, not his power, not his approval. She wanted to do her job. And she was terrifyingly good at it. The footage played again. That smile. Minwoo closed the laptop and poured himself a drink he wouldn't finish, staring out at the city he controlled through violence and strategy. Somewhere out there, Tanisha was probably asleep in whatever modest apartment federal consultants could afford, not thinking about him at all. And that bothered him more than it should. Because Sung Minwoo had spent his entire life being the most dangerous person in any room. The one everyone feared, respected, and underestimated at their peril. But Tanisha Floyd had walked into his world and proven something he'd never wanted to admit. There was always someone better. And he couldn't decide if that terrified him or excited him. Maybe both. The invitation arrived via email at 4:47 p.m. on Friday, terse, commanding, vintage Sung Minwoo. Business dinner. Mingles, 8 p.m. Discuss security upgrades and training protocols. Tanisha read it twice, then smiled at her computer screen in the small office they'd given her on the executive floor. She'd been expecting this. Men like Minwoo didn't handle being outperformed well. They needed to reassert dominance, and since he couldn't do it on the shooting range, he'd chosen different terrain. Mingles was Seoul's most exclusive restaurant, the kind of place where reservations required 3 months' notice and connections that couldn't be bought. Where cabinet ministers sat beside chaebol heirs, where deals worth billions were negotiated over 12-course meals that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Where a woman in worn clothes would stand out like blood on marble. Tanisha's smile widened. Let's see how this plays out. At exactly 8 p.m., she walked through Mingles' entrance, a study in deliberate contrast. The restaurant was all understated luxury. Soft lighting, minimalist decor, hushed conversations conducting in the verbal shorthand of the powerful. Every person there wore fashion as armor, designer labels, custom tailoring, jewelry that whispered rather than shouted wealth. And then there was Tanisha, in the same oversized blazer with frayed cuffs, the same worn slacks, the same cracked leather shoes. Her natural hair pulled back simply, no makeup, no concession to the environment. The maitre d's expression flickered. Professional enough to hide most of his disdain, but not all of it. I'm meeting Sung Minwoo, Tanisha said in perfect Korean, her accent carrying the soul sophistication that came from childhood years at Yongsan Garrison. The maitre d's posture shifted slightly. Of course. This way, please. She followed him through the dining room, aware of eyes tracking her movement, curious glances, subtle judgment, the quiet assessment of people who measured worth in visible currency. Minwoo was already seated at a corner table with strategic sight lines to all entrances. He wore a charcoal Tom Ford suit that probably cost 10 million won, paired with a white shirt so crisp it could cut glass. His watch, a Patek Philippe, caught the ambient light with casual arrogance. He stood as she approached, and Tanisha caught the micro-expression that crossed his face, satisfaction at the visual disparity between them, anticipation of her discomfort. Miss Floyd. He gestured to the chair across from him. Thank you for coming. Mr. Sung. Tanisha sat, completely at ease, as if she dined in Michelin-starred restaurants every night. Interesting choice of venue for a security briefing. I thought we could discuss your training proposals in a more relaxed setting. His eyes traveled over her outfit with deliberate slowness. I hope the dress code wasn't too restrictive. There it was, the first jab wrapped in courtesy. Tanisha smiled. Not at all. I've always believed in dressing appropriately for the actual work being done, not the impression being performed. Before Minwoo could respond, the sommelier appeared, a distinguished man in his 60s who carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who'd forgotten more about wine than most people would ever know. Good evening, he said in Korean. May I suggest a wine pairing for this evening's tasting menu? Minwoo opened his mouth, but Tanisha spoke first, switching effortlessly to Korean. What's your thinking for the raw fish courses? I noticed you carry the 2019 Chablis Grand Cru. Would you recommend that, or are you thinking something with more minerality to complement Chef Kang's preparation style? The sommelier's eyebrows rose with genuine interest. You're familiar with Chef Kang's work? I've read his interviews about using traditional Korean ingredients in French technique. His approach to fermentation suggests he'd pair well with wines that have similar complexity, maybe something with lees aging? She paused, considering. Though I'm curious about your Chenin Blanc selection. The Loire Valley bottles can be extraordinary with seafood if they have the right acid structure. For the next 5 minutes, Tanisha and the sommelier discussed wine with the easy fluency of shared expertise. Debating vintage variations, terroir influences, the interplay between Korean cuisine's fermented elements and French winemaking philosophy. Minwoo watched, his expression carefully neutral, but Tanisha could see the calculations running behind his eyes. This wasn't the script he'd prepared. Finally, the sommelier departed with their wine selections, Tanisha's suggestions, delivered with such natural authority that Minwoo hadn't even attempted to override them. You know wine, Minwoo said. It wasn't quite a question. I know a lot of things. Tanisha unfolded her napkin with unhurried grace. My father was stationed in France for 3 years when I was 14. I spent summers working in a vineyard in Burgundy, needed pocket money, and the owner needed help during harvest season. Turned out I had a palate for it. Military brat. Colonel's daughter. She met his eyes without deflection. Grew up on bases in Germany, Okinawa, Seoul, Virginia, back to Seoul, then France. You learn to adapt quickly when your environment changes every 2 years. And you learn that the most interesting education happens outside classrooms. The first course arrived, an elegant arrangement of raw fish with microgreens and a sauce that looked like art. Minwoo picked up his fork, still watching her. 6 languages, according to your file. German, Japanese, Korean, French, what else? Spanish and Mandarin. Picked up tactical Arabic during deployment, but I wouldn't call that fluent, more like enough to negotiate or threaten, depending on the situation. She tasted the fish, made a small sound of appreciation. Chef Kang's aging process is remarkable. You can taste the depth. You're very comfortable here, Minwoo observed, his voice carrying an edge now. For someone who dresses like they shop at charity stores. Tanisha set down her fork and looked at him with the same calm assessment she'd used at the shooting range. Mr. Sung, I think we should address the elephant in the room. Which is? You invited me here hoping to embarrass me. Put the poor federal consultant in an expensive restaurant where she'd fumble with wine lists and proper etiquette, prove she doesn't belong in your world. She picked up her wine glass, the Chablis Grand Cru, perfectly chilled. But here's what you keep getting wrong. I've been in more worlds than you've ever imagined. I've had dinner with French vintners and Taliban commanders. I've negotiated with warlords in languages you don't speak and attended state dinners where my father represented American military interests to foreign governments. She took a sip of wine, savoring it properly. These clothes? She gestured to her worn blazer. They're a choice, not a limitation. I could wear Dior and Louboutin if I wanted. I have the salary, the connections, the background. I choose not to because I learned a long time ago that people reveal more about themselves when they think you're beneath them. Minwoo's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. You keep mistaking poverty for ignorance, Mr. Sung. Tanisha's voice remained conversational, but her eyes had gone sharp. That's going to cost you. Because every time you underestimate someone based on their appearance, you miss what they're actually capable of. Like how you missed that your security team's positioning would get them killed. Like how you're missing whoever's using your organization to move illegal weapons right now. She leaned forward slightly. I don't dress to impress you. I don't need your approval or your world's validation. I'm here to do a job, and I'm very good at it. The sooner you stop trying to prove you're superior and start actually listening, the sooner we can find the person who's going to destroy everything you built. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the quiet murmur of surrounding conversations and the soft clink of expensive cutlery against porcelain. Minwoo studied her face, the absolute certainty in her expression, the complete lack of deference, and felt something shift in his chest. Not anger. Something more complicated. Respect. "You're right," he said finally. "I apologize." Tanisha blinked, clearly not expecting that. "I've spent my entire life in environments where appearance is armor," Minwoo continued. "Where showing weakness, financial, social, physical, invites predators. I assumed you were either naive or playing a role." He paused. "I was wrong." "Yes, you were. So let's start over." He raised his wine glass. "To actually working together instead of testing each other." Tanisha considered him for a long moment, then raised her own glass. "To finding whoever's using your empire as cover before the federal government burns it all down." Their glasses touched with a soft chime. And for the first time since meeting, Sung Minwoo and Tanisha Floyd saw each other clearly. Not as obstacles or puzzles, but as people who might actually be on the same side. Even if neither was quite ready to trust what that meant. The rest of dinner passed in a strange détente, not quite friendship, not quite trust, but a mutual acknowledgement that underestimating each other had become exhausting for both parties. They discussed security protocols between courses. Tanisha outlined a training regimen that would transform Minwoo's team from bodyguards into a legitimate tactical unit. Minwoo listened, asked intelligent questions, and only occasionally slipped back into his default mode of testing her knowledge. By the time dessert arrived, a deconstructed black sesame creation that looked like edible architecture, they'd reached something resembling productive conversation. "The third-floor security rotation," Minwoo said, reviewing notes on his phone. "You mentioned staggered shifts would reduce fatigue-related blind spots." 12-hour shifts are standard, but they're stupid," Tanisha replied, tasting the dessert with evident appreciation. "Human attention degrades after 6 hours of surveillance work. Your guards are half asleep by hour 10, which is exactly when someone would hit you." She gestured with her spoon. 8-hour rotations, overlapping by 30 minutes for briefing continuity. Costs more in personnel, but you don't end up dead, so it's a solid investment." Minwoo almost smiled. "You have opinions about everything. I have expertise about everything related to keeping people alive or killing them efficiently. There's a difference." She set down her spoon, dessert finished. "You're paying for that expertise, whether you acknowledge it or not. The government is paying you. The government is paying me to make sure you survive long enough to help them catch whoever's moving military-grade weapons through your shipping network." Tanisha's expression turned serious. "But I'm telling you how to fix your security infrastructure because watching competent people die from preventable mistakes offends me professionally." Before Minwoo could respond, his phone buzzed. A message from his driver: "Ready when you are, sir." He stood, signaling for the check. "My car is waiting. Can I offer you a ride?" Tanisha glanced at her own phone, probably checking bus schedules, Minwoo realized with some discomfort. She'd likely spent 2 hours on public transportation to get here while he'd been chauffeured in a Mercedes worth more than most Seoul apartments. "Sure," she said, standing. "Saves me the subway transfer." They walked through the restaurant together, Tanisha completely unfazed by the stares her worn clothes still attracted. The maitre d' bowed deeply to Minwoo, respect purchased through regular patronage and generous tips, and held the door open. The night air was crisp, Seoul's perpetual urban hum providing white noise against the quiet street where Mingles resided. Minwoo's Mercedes idled at the curb, his driver standing beside it, professional and alert. Minwoo's security detail, 2 men who'd been dining separately at the bar, fell into flanking positions as they approached the vehicle. And that's when Tanisha stopped walking. "Get down," she said quietly. Minwoo had spent enough time around violence to recognize certainty when he heard it. He didn't question, didn't hesitate, he dropped into a crouch behind a parked car, his hand instinctively reaching for the weapon he wore at the small of his back. His security detail reacted half a second slower, turning to assess the threat. They didn't get the chance. 3 men appeared from the shadows across the street, professionals, moving with coordinated precision, weapons rising in synchronized motion. Suppressed pistols, already aimed, fingers on triggers. Tanisha moved. Later, Minwoo would replay the security footage frame by frame, trying to understand exactly what he'd witnessed. But in the moment, it happened too fast for conscious processing. She crossed the distance to the first gunman in 2 strides, impossibly fast, her body low and angled to present minimal target profile. Her hand snapped out, striking the man's wrist with surgical precision. The weapon fired into pavement as his grip reflexively released. Tanisha caught the falling pistol with her left hand while her right elbow drove into the man's throat with devastating force. He went down choking. The second gunman tried to adjust his aim, but Tanisha was already inside his range. She redirected his weapon arm with one hand while the other delivered a palm strike to his nose with enough force that Minwoo heard the cartilage shatter from 15 feet away. The man staggered backward, and Tanisha swept his legs, driving him face first into the sidewalk with a crack that suggested a broken jaw at minimum. The third gunman showed better survival instincts. He started to run. Tanisha raised the stolen pistol and fired once. The suppressed weapon made a sound like a champagne cork wrapped in velvet. The running man's leg collapsed beneath him, and he went down screaming, a non-lethal hit to the thigh that ended the threat without ending the life. Total elapsed time, 4 seconds. Minwoo's security detail finally drew their weapons, training overcoming shock, but the fight was already over. 3 hostile operators neutralized, 1 weapon acquired, 0 friendly casualties. Tanisha safed the pistol, ejected the magazine, cleared the chamber, and set the components on the hood of Minwoo's Mercedes with the casual efficiency of someone cleaning up after a routine task. Then she walked back toward the restaurant entrance. "Miss Floyd," Minwoo called, standing slowly, adrenaline making his voice sharper than intended. "Where are you going?" She paused at the door. "I didn't finish my dessert. The black sesame foam melts if you let it sit too long." And she disappeared back inside Mingles, leaving Minwoo standing on a sole sidewalk with 3 incapacitated assassins, a traumatized driver, and security guards who looked like they'd just witnessed a magic trick they couldn't explain. By the time Seoul Metro Police arrived, responding to reports of gunfire, though the suppressed weapons had kept things quiet enough that most nearby pedestrians hadn't even noticed, Minwoo had made 6 phone calls that would ensure the incident disappeared into bureaucratic complexity. The 3 gunmen were already unconscious, thanks to Director Kang's people administering sedatives that would keep them quiet until they could be transferred to a private facility where questions would be asked with no lawyers present. Minwoo gave a brief statement to the responding officers: a robbery attempt, his security team had handled it, no, he didn't need medical attention, yes, he would come to the station tomorrow to file a formal report that would never actually be filed. The police left with the resigned efficiency of people who understood that certain situations existed outside their jurisdiction. Through it all, Tanisha sat inside Mingles, visible through the window, calmly finishing her dessert and discussing something with the sommelier. Probably wine. She looked utterly unconcerned with the chaos she'd prevented. When Minwoo finally returned to the restaurant, his security team now on high alert, scanning every shadow, every rooftop, every potential threat vector, he found Tanisha settling the wine bill with her own credit card. "That's not necessary," Minwoo said. "I ordered 3 glasses during our discussion. I pay for what I drink." She signed the receipt with a flourish. "Professional boundaries, Mr. Sung. Just because I saved your life doesn't mean you're buying me wine." She stood, collecting her worn messenger bag, and headed for the exit. Minwoo followed, his mind still processing what he'd witnessed. The speed. The precision. The complete lack of hesitation. His Mercedes was still idling at the curb, driver visibly shaken but functional. The sidewalk had been cleared of evidence, no blood, no weapons, no indication that an assassination attempt had occurred minutes earlier. They got in the back seat together, and Minwoo gave his driver Tanisha's address. Information he'd acquired from her personnel file and absolutely shouldn't admit to having memorized. The car pulled away from Mingles, merging into Seoul's late-night traffic. Silence filled the cabin for 3 blocks before Tanisha spoke. "You're welcome, by the way." Her voice was conversational, almost cheerful. "That's twice I've saved your operation this week. First the security vulnerabilities, now the actual assassination attempt. I'm starting to think you owe me more than dinner." Minwoo turned to look at her. She was examining her knuckles, slightly reddened from the impact with the second gunman's face, but otherwise unmarked. "Who were they?" he asked. "Won't know for sure until your people make them talk, but based on their positioning and weapon choice?" "Sankalpa." She said the name of Minwoo's primary rival syndicate with the same tone someone might use to identify a mildly interesting bird species. "They've been trying to move into your territory for months. Tonight was probably meant to look like a robbery gone wrong, kill you, destabilize your organization during succession chaos, absorb your operations." "How did you know they were there?" Third man checked his watch twice while pretending to smoke. "Amateur tell," he was confirming timing with someone. Second man had a bulge at his right hip that didn't match his jacket cut. "And the first man was watching you instead of his phone, which is what people actually do when they're waiting on a street corner." She shrugged. "I've been mapping threats since we left the restaurant. It's automatic." Minwoo felt something cold settle in his chest, not fear, but recognition. "You see the world as a tactical problem. I see the world as it is. Most people are so focused on their phones and their problems that they miss the guy across the street timing your murder." She looked at him directly. "You're good at reading people, Mr. Sung. I'm good at reading environments. Together, we might actually keep you alive." The car turned onto a quiet residential street, modest apartments, the kind where federal consultants on government salaries lived. "What do you really want?" Minwoo asked. The question came out more vulnerable than he'd intended. Tanisha regarded him for a long moment. "What do you mean? You're not here for money. You rejected my offer to pay for wine. You're not here for power, you already have federal authority. You're not here for recognition, you deliberately dress to be underestimated." He leaned forward slightly. "So what do you want, Tanisha Floyd? What drives someone to become this?" The car stopped in front of a nondescript building. Tanisha's hand was on the door handle, but she didn't open it immediately. "When I was 19, she said quietly, I was part of a protection detail for a diplomat in Kabul. We had intelligence that an attack was coming, but the higher-ups ignored it because the source wasn't credible enough. Too poor, too uneducated, didn't fit their profile of what reliable intelligence looked like." Her jaw tightened. "The attack happened. 7 people died, including the diplomat I was supposed to protect. I survived because I was outside doing a perimeter check that no one had authorized." She looked at Minwoo, and he saw something in her eyes he recognized, the specific pain of losing people because someone in power made a stupid decision. "I don't want money or power or recognition," Tanisha said. "I want competence to matter more than credentials. I want people to survive because someone paid attention instead of dying because someone didn't. And right now, you're the person who's going to die unless I can find whoever's using your organization to move weapons that will kill hundreds." She opened the door. "So that's what I want, Mr. Sung. I want to do my job without people's prejudices getting in the way. Think you can manage that?" Minwoo found himself nodding. "Yes." "Good. Pick me up at 7 tomorrow morning. We're going through your shipping manifests, all of them, including the ones you keep off the official books." She stepped out of the car, then leaned back in. "And Minwoo? Next time someone tries to kill you, maybe don't stand up quite so fast. You make an excellent target when you're backlit." She closed the door and walked toward her building without looking back. Minwoo sat in the Mercedes, watching her disappear into the modest lobby, and realized 3 things simultaneously. 1. Tanisha Floyd had just called him by his first name. 2. She'd saved his life with the kind of efficiency that suggested she'd done it before and would do it again without breaking stride. 3. He was in serious trouble. Because somewhere between the shooting range and the sidewalk assassination attempt, this had stopped being about federal consultants and security assessments. This had become personal. And Sung Minwoo had no idea what to do with that. Minwoo didn't sleep that night. He sat in his penthouse office, the city lights of Seoul blurring into abstract patterns as he replayed the assassination attempt frame by frame in his mind. Not the violence itself, he'd witnessed and orchestrated enough violence to be numb to it. What kept him awake was the 4-second window where Tanisha Floyd had moved like water and struck like lightning, eliminating threats with the kind of efficiency that transcended training and entered the realm of instinct. She'd saved his life without hesitation, then returned to finish her dessert. Who does that? His phone buzzed at 3:47 a.m., a message from Director Kong. The three men are talking. You need to hear this. Now. Minwoo was dressed and in his car within 10 minutes. The interrogation facility didn't officially exist. It was registered as a warehouse in Yangpyeong, an hour outside Seoul, owned by a shell company buried under 6 layers of corporate structure. The kind of place where questions got answered and bodies occasionally needed disposal. Minwoo arrived to find Kong waiting in the observation room, his expression grim. What did they say? Minwoo demanded. Kong pulled up audio files on his tablet. The contract came through an intermediary, someone inside your organization. They were given your schedule, security protocols, vehicle routes. Everything they needed to make the hit look random. Minwoo's blood went cold. Someone inside. They don't know who. The intermediary used encrypted channels, cryptocurrency payments, no direct contact. But boss, Kong hesitated. They mentioned something else. The contract wasn't just to kill you. It was to make it look like federal agents did it. They were supposed to leave evidence linking the hit to American intelligence. Why? To start a war. Between your organization and the federal government. Destabilize both sides while someone else moves into the power vacuum. Minwoo stared at the one-way glass, watching the 3 broken men in the interrogation room beyond. One of them, the one Tanisha had shot in the leg, was still receiving medical treatment from Kang's people. Their Sankopa? Minwoo asked. Former. They went freelance 6 months ago. Work for whoever pays. Kong set down the tablet. But here's the interesting part. They said the person who hired them specifically mentioned that federal agents were already embedded in your operation. That the timing was critical because a larger operation was coming. Minwoo felt the pieces clicking together with sickening clarity. Tanisha had known about the assassination attempt. She'd positioned herself to intercept it. And now it turned out someone had been expecting federal involvement. Where is she? Minwoo asked quietly. Who? Tanisha Floyd. Where is she right now? Kong checked his phone, accessing the discreet tracking they'd placed on Minwoo's vehicle. Still at her apartment. No movement since you dropped her off. I'm going there. Boss, it's 4 a.m. Now, Kong. Minwoo stood outside Tanisha's apartment building at 4:23 a.m., security detail waiting in the car, and did something he hadn't done in years. He was uncertain. The building was modest. 8 floors, aging exterior, the kind of place where young professionals and government workers lived because Seoul rent was crushing and federal salaries didn't stretch to luxury. Tanisha's apartment was on the 6th floor, unit 604. He should wait until morning. Should arrange a proper meeting. Should maintain the professional distance that had already eroded to nothing over the past week. Instead, Minwoo walked into the building and took the stairs. He knocked on 604 at exactly 4:30 a.m. The door opened within 5 seconds, no chain, no hesitation. Tanisha stood in the doorway wearing worn sweatpants and a faded army t-shirt, completely alert, no trace of sleep in her eyes. She held a pistol casually at her side, not aimed but ready. "I wondered how long it would take you," she said. "You were expecting me. You're predictable when you're rattled. Come in before your security detail attracts attention." Minwoo entered, and Tanisha closed the door behind him, engaging 3 separate locks with practiced efficiency. The apartment was small, 1 bedroom, a kitchenette, a living area that doubled as a workspace. But what struck Minwoo immediately was the wall. One entire side of the living room was covered in what looked like an investigation board. Photos, documents, timeline charts, red string connecting names and locations. At the center was a photo of Minwoo himself, surrounded by images of his organization's key personnel, shipping routes, financial records. "You've been investigating me," Minwoo said, his voice flat. "No." Tanisha set her pistol on the kitchen counter and walked to the wall. "I've been protecting you. There's a difference." She picked up a remote and turned on a laptop connected to a projector. The wall lit up with a classified document, official federal letterhead, marked top secret. Operation Broken Arrow. Interagency Task Force, DEA, FBI, CIA, NIS. Target, International Arms Trafficking Network. Timeline, 30 days to execution. Minwoo read the summary with growing horror. His organization was listed as a primary target, dozens of his operations, shipping routes, personnel identified by name. Estimated arrest count, 147 people. Estimated asset seizure, $3.2 billion. It was comprehensive. Devastating. The kind of federal operation that ended empires. "How did you get this?" he asked. "I'm part of the task force." Tanisha pulled up another document. "But I'm the only one who knows the truth. Everyone else thinks you're the primary target, the arms dealer moving weapons to terrorist organizations in Southeast Asia." She looked at him directly. "You're not. You're the patsy." Minwoo's mind raced. "Explain." Tanisha pulled up surveillance photos, shipping containers, coded manifests, transaction records. 4 months ago, NIS detected weapons shipments moving through established smuggling routes in South Korea. Military-grade hardware, assault rifles, explosives, anti-aircraft missiles. The kind of equipment that ends up in terrorist hands and kills hundreds. She zoomed in on a manifest. "The shipments were laundered through your organization's logistics network. Your routes, your contacts, your infrastructure. To any investigator, it looks like Sung Minwoo is running an international arms trafficking operation. But I'm not." "I know." Tanisha pulled up financial records. "Because I spent 3 months analyzing your operation's cash flows, communications, decision patterns. You're a criminal, Minwoo. You move drugs, you run protection rackets, you probably ordered more murders than I've had birthdays. But you're not stupid, and you're not reckless." She gestured to the analysis on screen. "Selling military weapons to terrorists is stupid and reckless. It brings international attention, federal task forces, the kind of scrutiny that destroys organizations. You've spent years building a sustainable criminal empire, profitable, controlled, below the threshold that triggers major intervention. This weapons trafficking is completely inconsistent with your operational pattern." Minwoo stared at the evidence, seeing his empire through her eyes. "Someone is using my infrastructure. Someone inside your organization. Someone with access to your shipping networks, your routes, your contacts." Tanisha pulled up a list of names. "Someone who knows enough to make it look authentic but doesn't understand that you'd never take this kind of risk." Minwoo studied the list, his inner circle. People he'd trusted for years. "You have suspects." 3 primary candidates based on access and opportunity. "But I can't move on them without proof, and the federal task force goes live in 30 days regardless of whether I've identified the real culprit." She looked at him with absolute seriousness. If I don't find the traitor before then, you go down. 147 of your people get arrested. Your empire collapses. And the real arms dealer walks away clean, probably absorbs your territory, and continues selling weapons that will kill hundreds. Why do you care? Minwoo asked. I'm a criminal. You said it yourself. Why not let the task force take me down? Tanisha was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice carried a weight that suggested this answer cost something to give. Because you're also a cooperating asset for South Korean intelligence. Minwoo went very still. You think I don't know about your arrangement with NIS? Tanisha pulled up more classified documents. You provide intelligence on North Korean operations, Chinese industrial espionage, Russian criminal networks operating in Asia. You've been feeding information to Korean intelligence for 6 years. Information that's prevented terrorist attacks, stopped assassinations, protected national security. She turned to face him fully. If you go down, so does South Korea's entire intelligence network in the criminal underworld. Every contact you've cultivated, every channel you've opened, every operation you've enabled, gone. Replaced by whoever takes over your territory, and they won't be cooperating with anyone. Minwoo felt the ground shift beneath him. The federal task force doesn't know. They don't know because it's compartmentalized. Korean intelligence isn't about to admit to American agencies that they're using a crime boss as an asset. It would be politically catastrophic. Tanisha's expression was hard. So they're going to let you burn unless I can prove you're not the arms dealer. And if you do prove it? Then we identify the real traitor, I bring evidence to the task force, they redirect the operation, and you survive with your empire intact. Your arrangement with NIS continues. South Korean intelligence keeps their asset. And I stop weapons from reaching terrorists who will use them to kill civilians. She crossed her arms. Everybody wins except the actual bad guy. Minwoo processed this, his mind clicking through implications and strategies. You've been protecting me from day one. From before day one. I've been on this case for 3 months. The federal consultant cover was my idea. Get embedded in your organization, gain access to your operations, identify the traitor before the task force moves. She gestured to the investigation wall. Everything I've done, the security assessments, the training, even calling out your team's vulnerabilities. It's all been about understanding your operation well enough to find the inconsistencies that point to the real arms dealer. The assassination attempt last night. Was the traitor trying to eliminate you before I could find them? If you die, the federal task force still moves forward, your organization collapses in succession chaos, and the real arms dealer disappears in the confusion. Tanisha's voice hardened. Saving your life wasn't heroic, Minwoo. It was pragmatic. Dead, you're useless to me. The brutal honesty should have offended him. Instead, Minwoo found it clarifying. What do you need from me? He asked. Full access. And I mean full, financial records, personnel files, communications logs, shipping manifests, everything. Including the operations you keep off the books, the deals you've never documented, the people you've paid in cash. She met his eyes. I need to see your entire empire with no filters, no sanitizing, no protecting yourself. Because somewhere in that data is the pattern that identifies your traitor. That information could destroy me even without the federal task force. Yes, Tanisha said simply. Which is why you're going to have to trust me. Trust. The word hung between them like a challenge. Minwoo had built his empire on never trusting anyone completely. Trust was leverage. Trust was vulnerability. Trust got you killed. But standing in Tanisha Floyd's modest apartment at 4:47 a.m., looking at an investigation wall that represented months of work to save him from a threat he hadn't even known existed, Minwoo realized something uncomfortable. He already trusted her. Had trusted her since the moment she'd stood between him and 3 gunmen without hesitation. When do we start? He asked. Now. Tanisha pulled out her laptop. I have secure access to your building's servers. We're going to spend the next 6 hours going through your shipping records from the past year, identifying every anomaly, every unusual transaction, every container that moved through your network without your explicit authorization. She poured 2 cups of coffee from a pot that suggested she'd been awake for hours before he arrived. And Minwoo? She handed him a cup. From this point forward, you don't make any major operational decisions without consulting me first. You don't trust anyone in your organization completely. You don't discuss this investigation with anyone except me and Director Kong, and only Kong because you're going to need his help accessing secured files. You're taking over my empire. I'm keeping you alive long enough to identify who's trying to destroy it. She sat down at her laptop. There's a difference. Minwoo took the coffee, cheap instant, nothing like what he usually drank, somehow perfect, and sat beside her. For the next 6 hours, as Seoul woke up outside and the sun rose over a city that had no idea a crime boss and a federal agent were working together to prevent an international incident, they worked. Shipping manifests. Financial transactions. Personnel movements. Communication logs. And slowly, painstakingly, a pattern began to emerge. Someone was very good at hiding their tracks. But Tanisha was better at finding them. At 11:00 a.m., Tanisha sat back from the laptop, her eyes red from screen fatigue, and pointed to a series of transactions. There, she said. Look at the timing. Minwoo leaned in, studying the data. A shipment of industrial equipment that moved through his Busan port facility 3 months ago. The manifest was clean, properly documented, signed off by authorized personnel. Except the signature timestamp was wrong by 17 minutes. Someone backdated this, Minwoo said. Someone who had access to your security protocols and authorization codes. Tanisha pulled up metadata. And someone who didn't realize your system logs both the signature time and the file modification time. They're usually identical. But this one shows it was signed after it was supposedly approved. Minwoo felt cold certainty settling in. Only 3 people have those access codes. Tanisha pulled up the suspect list she'd shown him earlier. 3 names. 3 people Minwoo had trusted with his empire. Director Kong. His head of security for 15 years. Lee Sunmi. His chief financial officer who managed billions in legitimate and illicit funds. Park Ji-hoon. His personal security lead, the man who'd been at his side through assassinations and federal raids. It's one of them, Tanisha said quietly. We have 29 days to figure out which one before the federal task force destroys everything you built. Minwoo looked at the 3 names. 3 people he'd trusted, one of whom was a traitor preparing to sacrifice him for profit. Then we'd better get started, he said. And as the morning light filled Tanisha's small apartment, 2 people who should have been enemies became something more complicated. Partners. Allies. And maybe, though neither would admit it yet, something neither of them knew how to name. The next 2 weeks transformed Minwoo's life in ways he hadn't anticipated. Tanisha moved into a secure office on the executive floor, not the modest workspace she'd been assigned initially, but a proper operations center with encrypted servers, secure communications equipment, and a wall-sized monitor that displayed real-time data streams from Minwoo's entire empire. She worked with the focused intensity of someone racing against a countdown. Because they were 27 days until Operation Broken Arrow went live and destroyed everything. Minwoo found himself spending 12-hour days in that office, watching Tanisha dissect his organization with surgical precision. She approached his criminal empire the way a mechanic approaches a complex engine, no judgment about what it was designed to do, just analytical assessment of how it functioned and where the failures existed. Your money laundering is elegant, she said on day 3, reviewing financial flows on multiple screens. Legitimate businesses generating real revenue, mixed with cash from illegal operations at a ratio that doesn't trigger automated banking alerts. You keep transaction sizes just below reporting thresholds, spread them across enough institutions that pattern recognition software can't connect them. Minwoo leaned against the desk beside her, coffee in hand. You sound impressed. I'm analytically appreciative. There's a difference. She highlighted a series of transfers. But here's where your CFO got sloppy. These transactions, they're the same elegant structure, but the timing is off. They're happening at intervals that match weapons shipment schedules, not your normal cash flow patterns. She pulled up a second screen showing shipping manifests. See? Every time one of these suspicious financial transactions occurs, there's a corresponding container movement through Busan port. Industrial equipment, agricultural machinery, construction materials. All legitimate-sounding cargo that happens to weigh exactly what military-grade weapons would weigh. Minwoo studied the correlation. Lee Sunmi has been with me for 8 years. Which makes her either a very patient traitor or innocent. Tanisha pulled up personnel files. Same goes for Kong and Park. Long service doesn't mean loyalty. Sometimes it just means someone's been waiting for the right opportunity. She was right, and Minwoo hated it. Trust was already a scarce commodity in his world. Discovering that one of his inner circle had betrayed him felt like watching the foundation of his empire crack. How do federal investigations approach this? He asked. Tanisha leaned back in her chair, stretching muscles tight from hours of screen time. Systematically. We build timelines, establish patterns, identify anomalies. Every criminal operation has a signature, decision patterns, risk tolerance, operational habits. When something doesn't match the established signature, it indicates outside influence. She pulled up a comparison chart. Your criminal operations, drug distribution, protection rackets, illegal gambling, they're all characterized by controlled risk. You avoid violence when possible, you pay off law enforcement strategically, you keep operations small enough to stay below federal radar. Conservative, sustainable, intelligent. Another chart appeared. But these weapons shipments? They're the opposite. High risk, high visibility, guaranteed to attract international attention. They're not just inconsistent with your pattern, they're suicidal for someone trying to maintain a criminal empire. So the federal task force should have seen the inconsistency. They did. Tanisha's expression hardened. But task forces are massive bureaucratic machines with institutional momentum. Once an operation reaches a certain stage, it's almost impossible to stop. Evidence gets interpreted to fit the existing theory rather than challenging it. And your reputation as a crime boss makes you an easy target to blame. Minwoo absorbed this, understanding with uncomfortable clarity how institutional assumptions could destroy him regardless of actual guilt. Teach me, he said. How investigations work. How federal agencies think. If I'm going to survive this, I need to understand the machinery trying to kill me. So Tanisha taught him. She explained how wiretaps functioned, how surveillance teams operated, how prosecutors built cases by connecting individual crimes into broader conspiracy charges. She walked him through the federal sentencing guidelines that would apply if he was arrested, the cooperation agreements that could reduce sentences, the witness protection protocols for people who testified against criminal organizations. It was a masterclass in his own potential destruction, delivered with the clinical precision of someone who'd participated in dozens of similar operations. And in return, Minwoo showed her the hidden empire. Not the sanitized version in corporate records and official filings, but the real infrastructure, the network of informants in law enforcement, the politicians on his payroll, the judges who ruled favorably in exchange for campaign contributions routed through shell companies. He showed her the violence she'd suspected but never seen documented. Contract killings, strategic beatings, the systematic intimidation that kept rivals in check and subordinates loyal. This is what you actually are, Tanisha said, reviewing surveillance footage of an enforcer delivering punishment to someone who'd skimmed from drug proceeds. The beating was brutal, efficient, designed to send a message. Yes, Minwoo said. No justification, no excuses. Just acknowledgement. And this? She pulled up intelligence reports he'd provided to Korean NIS, information that had prevented a North Korean assassination attempt on a government minister, details about Chinese industrial espionage that had protected Korean technology firms. Also what I am, Minwoo replied. Tanisha studied him for a long moment. You're a monster who occasionally does good things, or a good person who does monstrous things? Does it matter? Philosophically? Probably. Practically? Not really. She closed the files. I'm not here to judge your soul, Minwoo. I'm here to keep you alive long enough to stop weapons from reaching terrorists. Your moral complexity is your own problem. But despite the professional distance she tried to maintain, something was shifting between them. Day 19. They were in Minwoo's car on a stakeout, watching one of Lee Sunmi's known associates meet with an unknown contact at a coffee shop in Gangnam. Surveillance required patience, proximity, and hours of waiting for something to happen. It was 11:47 p.m. They'd been there since 8 o'clock. Tell me something, Minwoo said, breaking the comfortable silence. Why do you do this? Tanisha didn't look away from the coffee shop. Do what? This. Federal service, tactical operations, putting yourself in situations where you might have to kill people or watch them die. You're brilliant. You could consult for private firms, make triple your government salary, sleep in your own bed instead of spending nights in surveillance vans. You could ask yourself the same question, Tanisha replied. You're brilliant too. You could run legitimate businesses, make billions legally, avoid the constant threat of arrest or assassination. It's not the same. Isn't it? She finally turned to look at him, her face illuminated by the dashboard lights. You built your empire because it was the only path to power available to you. I joined federal service because it was the only path to purpose available to me. Purpose. I'm good at violence, Minwoo. Exceptional at it. I can kill people from distances they can't even perceive, neutralize threats before they materialize, see vulnerabilities in systems that seem secure. Her voice was matter of fact, no pride or shame. That skill set has exactly two applications. Criminal or government service. I chose the one that lets me sleep at night. Do you sleep at night? She smiled faintly. More than you do, probably. Minwoo found himself studying her profile, the strong jawline, the focused eyes, the absolute stillness that came from years of watching and waiting. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with conventional attractiveness and everything to do with competence distilled into human form. Same reason you built all this, she said quietly, still watching the coffee shop. Survival. You survived poverty, rival gangs, your own family's expectations. I survived being a black girl on military bases where I didn't fit, survived combat deployments where my gender made me a target, survived a system that wanted to define me by what I looked like instead of what I could do. She turned to face him fully now. We're both survivors, Minwoo. The only difference is whose rules we follow while surviving. The air in the car felt charged, heavy with something neither of them wanted to name. And when this is over? Minwoo asked. When we find the traitor and stop the federal task force? What happens to this partnership? I go back to Washington. You go back to being a crime boss who occasionally cooperates with intelligence agencies. We become a footnote in each other's operational history. That's it? Tanisha's expression shifted, something vulnerable breaking through the tactical mask. That's all it can be. I'm a federal agent. You're a criminal. There's no version of this where we get a happy ending. But there's a version where we get an ending that's not tragic. Maybe. Her hand was resting on the center console, inches from his. If we're both lucky. And smart. And willing to accept that some connections matter even when they can't last. Minwoo's fingers moved closer to hers, not quite touching. I've never been good at accepting limitations. I've noticed. Tanisha smiled, and it was real, not the tactical courtesy she showed subordinates or the professional mask she wore during operations, but genuine warmth. It's one of your more annoying qualities. Along with the arrogance, the controlling behavior, the assumption that money solves everything, the terrible taste in office furniture. Minwoo laughed, surprising himself. My office furniture is. His phone buzzed. Text from the surveillance team on the other side of the coffee shop. Subject departing. Unknown contact heading to parking garage. The moment shattered. Professional distance reasserted itself. Tanisha was already moving, camera ready, tracking the unknown contact as they left the coffee shop and headed for a black sedan. She captured multiple photos, face, license plate, identifying features. Run the plates, she said, all business now. And cross-reference the face against your organization's contact database. Minwoo made the call to Kong, relaying instructions, pulling back into the operational mode that had kept him alive for 20 years. But as they drove back to Chongqing Tower, processing surveillance data and planning the next day's investigation, Minwoo kept replaying Tanisha's words. There's no version of this where we get a happy ending. She was right. She was completely, logically, undeniably right. And for the first time in his life, Sung Minwoo wanted to be wrong about something. Day 23 arrived with the kind of clarity that precedes devastation. Tanisha walked into Minwoo's office at 6:47 a.m. carrying a tablet and an expression that made his stomach drop before she said a word. It's Kong, she said simply, setting the tablet on his desk. Minwoo stared at the screen, his coffee forgotten, the Seoul sunrise painting his office in shades of gold that suddenly felt obscene. The evidence was irrefutable. Financial transactions Kong had hidden in subsidiary accounts, communication logs encrypted but not encrypted enough, metadata that placed him at shipping facilities during critical transfer windows. Director Kong. His oldest friend. The man who'd stood beside him for 15 years, who'd saved his life twice, who knew more about Minwoo's empire than anyone except Minwoo himself. You're certain, Minwoo said, his voice flat. 97%. The remaining 3% is professional caution against confirmation bias. Tanisha pulled up a timeline. He's been doing this for 18 months. Small shipments at first, testing your infrastructure's vulnerabilities. Then larger ones as he gained confidence. The weapons are moving to a cell operating in Indonesia, radical extremists planning attacks on civilian targets. She zoomed in on intercepted communications. They're planning something big. Hotel bombing, hundreds of casualties. The weapons Kong provided will make it possible. Minwoo felt something cold and familiar settling in his chest, the emotional shutdown that had allowed him to survive his father's brutality, his mother's abandonment, the violence required to build an empire from nothing. He'd learned young that feelings were luxuries that got you killed. But this hurt in a way he hadn't anticipated. How long have you known? He asked. 48 hours. I needed to be absolutely certain before telling you. Tanisha's voice softened slightly. I know what he means to you. He means nothing. The lie came automatically, a reflex. He's a traitor. He gets treated like one. Minwoo. When can we move on him? Tanisha studied his face, clearly seeing through the mask but professional enough not to push. Today. We have enough evidence to present to the federal task force, redirect their operation, and take Kong into custody. But there's a problem. What problem? If we arrest him through official channels, he'll lawyer up immediately. Federal prosecution moves slowly. And the extremist cell will know their weapons supply is compromised. They'll either accelerate their attack or abandon it and wait for another opportunity. She pulled up photos of the terrorist cell. Either way, people die. Minwoo understood immediately. You want to interrogate him first. Off the books. I want you to interrogate him. You know him better than anyone. You'll know when he's lying, when he's holding back, what pressure points will break him. Her expression was grim. We need the full network, his contacts, the extremist's timeline, every detail about the planned attack. And we need it before the federal task force arrests him and everything disappears behind lawyers. You're asking me to torture my oldest friend for information. I'm asking you to save hundreds of lives by doing what you've probably done dozens of times before. Tanisha didn't flinch from the brutality of it. The only difference is this time it's personal. Minwoo looked out at Seoul, the city waking up below, millions of people who had no idea that their safety depended on decisions being made in this office. Ordinary people living ordinary lives, protected by violence they'd never witness and sacrifices they'd never know about. Set it up, he said. Today. I want him in my office at noon. Tell him we've identified the traitor and need his tactical assessment. He'll be armed. So will we. Minwoo turned back to face her. And Tanisha? When this goes wrong, and it will go wrong, you stay out of the crossfire. Kong is mine to handle. Not a chance. Her tone left no room for argument. We're partners. That means I watch your back even when you're being stupidly noble about protecting me. Despite everything, Minwoo almost smiled. Stupidly noble? You're planning to confront an armed traitor who's already proven willing to kill you. If that's not stupid nobility, I don't know what is. She picked up her tablet. I'll be in the adjoining conference room with a clear sight line to your office. If he makes a move, I take the shot. Non-lethal? That's up to him. Tanisha headed for the door, then paused. Minwoo? I'm sorry, it's Kong. I know that doesn't help, but I am. Then she was gone, leaving Minwoo alone with the evidence of his oldest friend's betrayal and 6 hours to prepare for a confrontation that would end with blood on his office floor. One way or another. At exactly noon, Director Kong walked into Minwoo's office. He looked the same as always, sharp suit, alert posture, the controlled competence of a man who'd survived in the criminal underworld through skill and loyalty. Except the loyalty had been a performance. 15 years of performance. Boss, Kong said, settling into the chair across from Minwoo's desk. You said you identified the traitor? Minwoo didn't answer immediately. He was studying Kang's face, looking for tells, micro-expressions, nervous habits, anything that would have warned him this was coming. But Kang's mask was perfect. Professional. Calm. Just like Minwoo had trained him to be. We did, Minwoo said finally. The evidence is comprehensive. Financial records, shipping manifests, communication logs. 18 months of systematic betrayal, using my infrastructure to move weapons to terrorists. Kong leaned forward, concerned. Who? Someone I trusted completely. Someone who knew my operations intimately enough to hide the weapons shipments within legitimate cargo. Someone with authorization codes and security access. Park? Kang's expression shifted to anger, perfectly performed anger. I knew that bastard was too ambitious. What's our move? Interrogation? Disappearance? Minwoo stood slowly, walking to the windows overlooking Seoul. I'm curious about something. What's that? Why? Minwoo turned back to face him. After 15 years, after everything we built together, why betray me? The office went very quiet. Kang's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, calculation, assessment, the moment a cornered animal decides whether to run or fight. I don't know what you're talking about, Kong said carefully. Minwoo pulled up the evidence on his desk monitor, all of it, the full timeline of Kang's betrayal displayed in irrefutable detail. 18 months. Indonesian extremist cell. Hotel bombing planned for next month. You've been selling them weapons using my network as cover. Kong stared at the screen, his face going carefully blank. The mask slipping just enough to reveal the calculation beneath. How long have you known? He asked quietly. Long enough. Minwoo moved back to his desk, standing rather than sitting, maintaining tactical advantage. Why, Kong? Was it money? Ideology? Simple opportunity? Kong was silent for a long moment, then laughed, a bitter, exhausted sound. You really don't see it, do you? After all these years, you still don't understand. Explain it to me. We built this empire together. Your plans, my execution. Your vision, my violence. 15 years of making you rich while I stayed in the shadows. Kang's voice hardened. You sit in your penthouse, where your expensive suits get treated like royalty. I do the dirty work and get a salary. A generous salary, sure, but still a salary. Still your employee. So this was about money. This was about recognition. Kong stood now, squaring his shoulders. About building something that was mine instead of being your attack dog for the rest of my life. The weapons contracts were supposed to be my exit. Enough money to start my own organization, my own empire. Somewhere I'd be the boss instead of the loyal second. Minwoo felt something crack in his chest, not surprise, but disappointment. After everything, it came down to ambition and resentment. The same forces that had driven Minwoo to build his empire were destroying it from within. The terrorists, Minwoo said. The planned hotel bombing. Did you know? I knew they wanted weapons. What they did with them wasn't my concern. Kang's expression was cold. Business is business. Hundreds of civilians will die. Thousands of civilians die every day. I don't lose sleep over statistics. Kong moved slightly, his hand drifting toward his jacket. But I am sorry it came to this, boss. I hoped to be gone before you figured it out. You're not going anywhere. Minwoo's voice was ice. You're going to tell me everything, the extremist cell's timeline, their targets, every detail about the planned attack. Then you're going to federal custody. Kong smiled, and it was terrible, the smile of someone who'd already decided how this ended. I don't think so. His hand moved fast, 15 years of tactical training translating into muscle memory. The gun cleared his jacket in a smooth draw, rising to aim. Not at Minwoo. At the conference room door where Tanisha was positioned. She's the real problem, Kong said, his weapon steady. The federal agent who came here to destroy you. I do this, I'm saving your empire. You should thank me. Time slowed. Minwoo saw the gun, saw the angle, saw Kang's finger tightening on the trigger. Saw the trajectory that would send a bullet through the door and into Tanisha. He moved without thinking. One step placed him directly between Kang's weapon and the conference room door. Between the gun and Tanisha. Move, boss, Kong said, his voice almost pleading. Don't make me shoot you. You want her? Minwoo's voice was steady despite the adrenaline screaming through his system. You go through me first. Kang's expression shifted, confusion, frustration, something that might have been betrayal. She's federal. She's here to destroy everything we built. She's here to save it. From you. Minwoo held his ground. Lower the weapon, Kong. This doesn't end well for you. It doesn't end well for anyone. Kang's grip tightened. But at least I tried to build something instead of staying in your shadow forever. His finger moved toward the trigger. The conference room door opened. Tanisha stepped through, weapon raised, stance perfect, and fired. The shot was surgical. Kang's right shoulder, precisely where the subclavian artery wasn't, where the bullet would destroy motor function without causing fatal hemorrhaging. He dropped his weapon immediately, the gun clattering to the floor as his arm went limp. He collapsed to his knees, gasping, staring at Tanisha with shock and pain. She walked forward, kicked his weapon away, and stood over him with the same calm she'd shown finishing dessert after preventing an assassination. I don't miss, she said quietly. If I wanted you dead, you would be. Minwoo stood frozen, his heart hammering, the reality of what had almost happened settling like concrete in his chest. Kong had aimed at Tanisha. Would have killed her. And Minwoo had stepped between them without hesitation. When had she become more important than his own survival? Tanisha was already on her phone, calling for medical, the kind that didn't ask questions and didn't report gunshot wounds. Secure the office. Get a trauma team up here. Subject is wounded but stable. Kong looked up at Minwoo, blood seeping through his expensive shirt, 15 years of partnership dying in his eyes. You chose her over me. Over everything we built. You chose terrorism over loyalty, Minwoo replied. We're not the same. Director Kong, friend, partner, traitor, said nothing else. He just knelt there bleeding, staring at the empire he'd tried to steal, until the medical team arrived and took him away. When the office was finally empty, Kong removed, blood cleaned, evidence secured, Minwoo and Tanisha stood by the windows, watching the sun set over Seoul. You stepped in front of a gun for me, Tanisha said quietly. You saved my life. Again. Minwoo's hands were shaking slightly, adrenaline crash, delayed shock. We're even. We're not even close to even. She turned to look at him. You just lost your oldest friend because of this investigation. Because of me. I lost him 18 months ago when he decided to sell weapons to terrorists. Minwoo's voice was hollow. I just didn't know it yet. Tanisha reached out, her hand finding his, the first time they'd touched deliberately, intentionally. Her fingers were warm, steady, real. I'm sorry, she said. Don't be. You were right. About everything. Minwoo looked down at their joined hands. Now what? Now we have 6 days to extract everything Kong knows about the terrorist cell before the federal task force deadline. Then I take that information to my superiors, they redirect the operation, and hundreds of lives get saved. And us? Tanisha's grip tightened slightly. I don't know. I've never been good at the after part. Neither have I. They stood there as darkness fell over Seoul, two people who'd survived betrayal and bullets, holding on to each other because letting go felt impossible even though everything logical said they should. In 6 days, this would be over. But tonight, they had this moment. And sometimes, in the spaces between survival and destruction, moments were enough. The federal raid on Chongqing Corporation happened at 6 a.m. on day 30, exactly as Operation Broken Arrow had scheduled. 47 agents from 4 different agencies descended on Minwoo's empire with warrants, tactical gear, and the bureaucratic certainty that they were dismantling an international arms trafficking network. They seized servers, arrested personnel, froze accounts, the full machinery of federal law enforcement executing a plan 18 months in the making. Except the plan had changed. Minwoo sat in his penthouse office watching the organized chaos unfold below, Tanisha beside him, as federal agents arrested the right people for the first time in the operation's history. Not Minwoo's inner circle. Not his legitimate business operations. But the Indonesian extremist cell's contacts in Seoul, the shell companies Kong had created to move weapons, the logistics personnel who'd been bribed or coerced into facilitating the trafficking. The raid was surgical now instead of catastrophic. Targeted instead of destructive. Your empire survives, Tanisha said quietly, watching agents escort a mid-level manager out in handcuffs, someone who'd helped Kong without understanding what they were really moving. Damaged, but intact. Thanks to you. Minwoo's voice was hollow. He should feel relief. Victory. Something other than this gnawing emptiness. Thanks to Kong talking. Tanisha had spent the past 6 days in an undisclosed facility, extracting every detail from Director Kong about the weapons network, the terrorist cell, the planned attack. He gave us everything once he realized you weren't going to protect him. The hotel bombing had been prevented. 247 lives saved because Kong had provided the timeline, the targets, the explosives locations. Indonesian authorities had raided the cell 3 days ago. 17 arrests, enough weapons to level a city block, and a plan that would have killed hundreds during an international business conference. All prevented because a federal agent had seen patterns that everyone else missed. What happens to him? Minwoo asked. Federal supermax. 40 years minimum. He cooperated, so no death penalty, but he'll die in prison either way. Tanisha's expression was neutral, professional. The extremist cell members will face trial in Indonesia. Most will get execution. Minwoo nodded. He felt nothing about Kang's fate. The friendship had died in his office when a gun was aimed at Tanisha. What remained was just the administrative cleanup of a betrayal. And me? He asked. Tanisha pulled out an official document, federal letterhead, signed by people whose names appeared in classified briefings. You're now a registered federal informant. Your cooperation with Korean intelligence continues, but now it's coordinated with American agencies. You provide intelligence on criminal networks in Asia, weapons trafficking, organized crime. In exchange, your legitimate businesses remain untouched and your less legitimate operations exist in a gray area where federal prosecution is not in the public interest. She set the document on his desk. You're protected, Minwoo. As long as you keep providing valuable intelligence, your empire is safe from the kind of operation that would have destroyed it. I became what I always feared. A government asset. You became what you always were, Tanisha corrected. You just have official paperwork now. Minwoo signed the document without reading it. The words didn't matter, his signature had bought survival at the cost of independence. He was protected, but he was owned. Outside, the federal raid was winding down. Agents loading evidence into vehicles, arrested personnel being processed, the sun rising over Seoul like any other day. Except nothing was the same. When do you leave? Minwoo asked, not looking at her. Tanisha was quiet for a moment. Tomorrow. 3 p.m. flight to Brussels. New assignment, different operation. The work continues. Of course it does. He finally turned to face her. And us? There is no us, Minwoo. There was a partnership. A temporary alliance. Two people who needed each other to survive. Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed something more complicated. It's over. It doesn't have to be. Yes, it does. Tanisha stood, professional distance reasserting itself. I'm a federal agent. You're a criminal informant. My career depends on maintaining boundaries. Your survival depends on not giving federal agencies leverage over you. A relationship between us is leverage. Weakness. Risk. You saved my life multiple times. You think I care about risk? I care about it. Her voice hardened. I've spent my entire career building credibility in a system that wants to dismiss me. If I compromise that for a relationship with a crime boss, even a protected one, I lose everything I've worked for. Minwoo felt anger flash through him, hot and irrational and completely justified. So that's it? 6 weeks of partnership, and you just walk away? Yes. Tanisha's expression was pain wrapped in determination. Because walking away is the only thing that lets us both keep what we've built. You keep your empire. I keep my career. We both survive. I don't want to just survive anymore. Then you're a fool. She picked up her bag. The same worn messenger bag she'd carried since day one. Survival is all there is, Minwoo. Everything else is fantasy. She walked to the door, and Minwoo felt something desperate claw at his chest. Stay, he said. Tanisha, please. Just, stay. She paused, hand on the doorframe, not turning back. You know I can't. Then I'll come with you. Brussels, wherever. I can relocate operations, manage the empire remotely. And abandon everything you built? Leave Seoul, leave your network, leave the only world where you have power? Now she turned, and her eyes were wet. You'd resent me within 6 months. Hate me within a year. I won't do that to either of us. So we do nothing? Feel nothing? Pretend these 6 weeks didn't matter? We acknowledge that they mattered. Tanisha's voice broke slightly. And we let that be enough. She left before he could respond, the door closing with a soft click that sounded like finality. Minwoo stood alone in his office, surrounded by the empire he'd saved, and felt emptier than he'd ever felt in his life. Incheon International Airport, Terminal 2, 2:47 p.m. the next day. Minwoo stood at the observation deck, watching planes taxi and depart, knowing Tanisha's flight was boarding below. He'd told himself he wouldn't come. Told himself clean breaks were easier. Told himself a lot of things that dissolved the moment he'd gotten in his car and driven here anyway. He couldn't see her from here, security wouldn't let him pass the checkpoint without a boarding pass, and showing up at her gate felt like the kind of desperate gesture that would embarrass them both. So he watched the planes instead and wondered which one would take her away. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Observation deck, west side. Really? You're watching from a distance instead of saying goodbye properly? That's very on-brand for you. Minwoo turned, scanning the observation deck, and saw her. Tanisha stood 50 feet away, carry-on bag over her shoulder, wearing jeans and a faded jacket that probably cost less than his shoes. She looked tired, beautiful, and completely out of place among the tourists taking photos. He walked to her, not caring who saw, not caring about anything except the fact that she was still here. You came, he said. You came, she replied. Couldn't let you be the only one doing stupid noble gestures. They stood there, surrounded by strangers and the white noise of airport announcements, and Minwoo realized he had no idea what to say. Everything felt inadequate, too small for what he was feeling, too large for what they could actually be. You could stay, he said finally. Seoul needs good security consultants. I could pay well. Tanisha smiled sadly. You could come with me. Brussels needs people who understand criminal networks. The pay's terrible, but the chocolate is excellent. I have an empire to run. I have a career to maintain. Neither of them moved. So this is it, Minwoo said. We just walk away. We acknowledge that what we had was real, even if it can't last. Tanisha's hand found his, fingers interlacing. We accept that some people matter even when they can't stay. And we let each other go before this turns into something that hurts more than it already does. Minwoo pulled her closer, and she came willingly, her head resting against his chest, his arms wrapping around her like he could keep her safe from distance and duty and all the reasons this was ending. I'll miss you, he said into her hair. I'll miss you too. Her voice was muffled against his expensive suit. But we're survivors, remember? We'll survive this. They held each other for another moment. Long enough for Minwoo to memorize how she felt, how she smelled, the exact pressure of her arms around him, then she pulled back. I have to board. I know. She stood on her toes and kissed him, brief, chaste, completely inadequate for what it was supposed to express. Then she picked up her bag and walked toward security. Minwoo watched her go, the distance growing with each step, until she disappeared into the crowd of travelers heading to different lives in different countries. His phone buzzed again. Another text from the unknown number. Don't be too miserable. It's bad for your health. And Minwoo? Thank you for stepping in front of that gun. I won't forget it. T. He read it 3 times, then went back to watching planes depart, wondering which one carried the only person who'd ever seen him completely and hadn't looked away. Sung Minwoo sat in his office at 11:23 p.m., reviewing intelligence reports for Korean NIS, and tried to remember why any of this had mattered. 6 months since Tanisha left. 6 months of running a legitimate empire that felt like playing house. 6 months of being effective, profitable, and completely hollow. His operations had shifted, still criminal at the edges, but mostly legal now. Government contracts, corporate security consulting, intelligence brokering for agencies that paid well and asked few questions. He was making more money than ever, facing less risk, operating with federal protection that made him untouchable. And he was miserable. The door opened. Park Ji-hoon, promoted to head of security after Kang's arrest, entered with a package. This arrived for you. No return address, passed through security screening. It's clean. Min-woo took the package, small, wrapped in plain brown paper, addressed in handwriting he didn't recognize. He opened it carefully, old habits dying hard, even with federal protection. Inside was a single photograph. Tanisha, in full tactical gear, standing on a mountain ridge with snow-capped peaks behind her. She looked harder than he remembered, thinner, sharper, like 6 months had aged her in ways that had nothing to do with time. Her hair was pulled back military style, her expression serious, professional. But her eyes were the same. Intelligent. Capable. Lonely. Min-woo flipped the photo over. On the back, in the same handwriting from the package. Brussels is boring. Seoul needs a new head of corporate security. T. He stared at the message for a full minute, his pulse hammering, his mind racing through implications and possibilities and the logistics of what this actually meant. She was offering to come back. Not as a federal agent. As his security consultant. His partner. His. Min-woo was moving before he'd consciously decided, grabbing his phone, calling his pilot. Get the plane ready. I need to be in Brussels in 12 hours. Park stared at him. Sir, you have meetings tomorrow, obligations. Cancel them. All of them. Min-woo was already grabbing his passport, his mind calculating flight times and time zones. And Park? Clear my schedule for the next month. I'm bringing someone home. Tanisha Floyd walked into Chonggang Tower at exactly 9 a.m. on a Tuesday, and everything stopped. Not because of drama. Not because of spectacle. But because she walked in wearing a tailored Armani suit that probably cost more than Min-woo's, her natural hair styled professionally, heels that added 3 inches to her height, and the kind of quiet confidence that came from 6 months of proving herself in international operations. She looked like money. Power. Success. And she was looking directly at Min-woo, who stood in the lobby with his entire executive board, having called an emergency meeting 30 minutes ago with no explanation. Miss Floyd, Min-woo said, his voice carefully neutral despite the fact that his heart was trying to escape his chest. Thank you for coming. Mr. Sung. Tanisha's smile was professional, perfect. Your offer was very generous. I thought it deserved an in-person discussion. The executive board looked confused, they'd been given no context, no warning that their boss had flown to Brussels 3 days ago and returned with a new security consultant. Tanisha walked closer, her heels clicking on the marble floor, until she stood directly in front of Min-woo. I got a raise, she said conversationally. Turns out saving ungrateful billionaires pays well. The Belgian government was very impressed with my work on the weapons trafficking case. Promoted me, gave me a team, assigned me to their counterterrorism division. I'm not ungrateful, Min-woo replied. Prove it. The challenge in her eyes was unmistakable. The lobby went silent. Executives frozen, security personnel watching, the air thick with the kind of tension that precedes either violence or something equally dramatic. Min-woo closed the distance between them in 2 steps, cupped her face in both hands, and kissed her. Not professionally. Not carefully. With 6 months of missing her, wanting her, surviving without her compressed into a single moment of complete honesty. Tanisha kissed him back without hesitation, her arms wrapping around his neck, 6 months of Brussels and boredom and pretending she didn't think about him every day dissolving in the reality of his presence. When they finally broke apart, the entire executive board was staring with expressions ranging from shock to scandalized to impressed. Tanisha leaned in close, her lips near his ear, and whispered, "You're still sitting in a tactical weak point. Conference room windows face east. Sniper's dream setup. You really should fix that. Minwoo laughed, actually laughed, for the first time in 6 months, the sound surprising him with its genuineness. Then I guess I'll need a permanent security consultant, he said. Consulting fees are non-negotiable. Tanisha pulled back slightly, her professional mask returning but her eyes still warm. And I have conditions. I report to no one except you. I have full operational authority over security protocols. And you stop underestimating people based on their appearance. Done. What else? I want an office on the executive floor with actual windows. I want access to your intelligence network. And, she paused, suddenly vulnerable. I want you to understand that I'm choosing this. Choosing Seoul, choosing your world, choosing you. But I'm not giving up who I am to do it. I wouldn't want you to. Minwoo's voice was serious now. I want exactly who you are. The federal agent turned consultant who sees vulnerabilities I miss, who calls me on my mistakes, who makes me better than I am alone. That's very romantic for a crime boss. Reformed crime boss. I'm legitimate now. Mostly. We'll see about that. Tanisha turned to address the executive board, all business now. Gentlemen, I'm Tanisha Floyd, your new head of corporate security. Over the next month, I'll be conducting a comprehensive assessment of all operations, personnel, and protocols. Some of you will be reassigned. Some will be retrained. Some might be fired. Any questions? The executives looked at Minwoo for guidance. He smiled. You heard her. Full cooperation. Anyone who gives Miss Floyd difficulty answers to me personally. The meeting dissolved, executives fleeing to their offices to process what had just happened, security personnel already updating protocols, the machinery of Minwoo's empire shifting to accommodate its newest and most dangerous asset. When they were finally alone in the lobby, Minwoo and Tanisha stood together, looking at the building that would now be theirs to protect and transform. You really left Brussels for this? Minwoo asked. Brussels was boring. Important work, good salary, excellent chocolate. But boring. Tanisha leaned against him, comfortable in a way she'd never allowed herself before. Turns out I prefer Seoul. The work is complicated, the coffee is terrible, and the boss is difficult. But it matters in ways Brussels didn't. Because of me? Because of us. She looked up at him. We're better together than separate, Minwoo. Took me 6 months to admit it, but it's true. You make me want to build something instead of just stopping bad things from happening. And I make you better, Minwoo finished. You make me better. More careful, more thoughtful, less willing to accept that violence is the only solution. I wouldn't go that far. Violence is still a very effective solution. Tanisha grinned. I just make sure it's the right solution instead of the convenient one. They stood there for another moment, then Tanisha pulled away, all business again. Come on. Show me these tactical weak points you've been ignoring. We have a lot of work to do if we're going to turn this corporation into something that can't be destroyed by the next federal investigation. Or the next assassination attempt. Or the next betrayal by someone you trust. She squeezed his hand. But that's why you have me now. I see the threats before they materialize. And I see the opportunities before they disappear. Minwoo squeezed back. Partnership? Partnership. Tanisha smiled, real, warm, completely genuine. Now let's go review those building schematics. Your conference room positioning is still terrible, and I have opinions. They walked toward the elevator together, her hand on his shoulder, both of them smiling at the future they were about to build. Not perfect. Not simple. But theirs. And in a world of violence and betrayal and impossible choices, that was more than either had dared to hope for. Love wins when respect comes first. When you see someone not for what they look like or where they come from, but for who they are and what they're capable of becoming. Sung Min-woo learned that lesson from a woman in worn-out clothes who turned out to be the most dangerous and capable person he'd ever met. Tanisha Floyd learned it from a crime boss who stepped in front of a gun to protect her without hesitation. They built something together, not perfect, but real. Not easy, but worth it. If you loved this story, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about unexpected connections and the power of seeing people clearly. Comment below. Would you work with someone who mocked you? Let me know, I love hearing your thoughts. Thanks for watching, and remember, the most dangerous people are often the ones you underestimate. Until next time.